Production, can you tell me we're on, please?
Broadcast is now live.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority. If I can just say, please, if you could speak into your microphones during this, because some of you I can't even see, and it'd be nice to know that you're here. Let me just read out the broadcast statement. Welcome to this meeting of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority. This meeting is being held at our Fire and Police Shed headquarters at Eastleigh as a physical meeting maintaining social distancing. This meeting is also being recorded for broadcast on the authority's website and will be available for repeated viewing. The press and members of the public are also permitted to film and broadcast this meeting. Those remaining at the meeting are consenting to being filmed and recorded and to possible use of those images and recordings for broadcasting purposes. There is no scheduled fire alarm today. In the event of an alarm sounding off, please leave the building by the nearest and safest fire exits, and I suggest you follow somebody in uniform. Right, agenda items. Item 1. Katie, apologies for absence, please.
We've had apologies from Councillor Stevens and Councillor Fazakerley, Chairman.
Good, thank you. I would like you, Roger.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just mention is that unfortunately Councillor Fazakerley isn't here today because he's having to isolate because of a situation in Portsmouth, and he's had to isolate for 10 days and it doesn't expire until tomorrow. What I find is totally unacceptable is that Parliament can actually sort of meet with partly in Parliament, partly on screens, and yet we're not allowed to do so to allow him to attend. So I think that within the minutes, I think that it should record why he's not here, because that the system doesn't allow him to be, and he said he's going to actually just watch the broadcast this morning. But I think that the whole system, and I'm not blaming the service in any way at all, I think that the legislation is actually stupid. Thank you.
Point taken. Katie, have you got that? Okay. I'd like to welcome at this stage Donna Jones, our Police and Crime Commissioner, who is here as an invited guest of the authority. Donna, you want to say something?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll be with you for the whole meeting, with the exception of, as I did say to the Chair, I need to nip out for about 10 minutes just after 11 o'clock to do a quick interview about the new National Police and Crime Plan, which some of you may have seen information about in the press this morning.
Thank you. Item 2, declaration of interest. Katie? No? None? Okay, item 3, minutes of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority meeting of the 15th of June. Does anybody have any comment on those meeting minutes? No? So I can take them as accepted? Thank you. Item 4, deputations. There weren't any up until the 22nd. Are there any? No? Excellent. Item 5, Chairman's announcements. I've got several. I look forward to travelling to the Isle of Wight on August the 9th with the Chief. We are going around the fire stations in the Isle of Wight. The way things are going, it's probably going to be my summer holiday, but there we go. And we can report back on what they're doing. It is my intention and the Chief's that we will have in the autumn some sort of round table meeting for us all with Donna, although I haven't asked her yet, hopefully, and also with somebody like Roger Hurst, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner and Fire Commissioner for Essex, because I think it's good to get these sort of conversations going with people who are actually doing these sort of things. So that'll be announced when we fix a date. I just want to say something briefly about Rob Carr, who, there he is, I can see him, who, as you know, has been promoted. Congratulations, Rob. But he will be with us for approximately a year, because his takeover is Catherine Edgecombe there, so he will help her into the job. So he's not gone yet. Things I've been doing. Last Friday I went to a graduation ceremony in here for the new batch of firefighters. Which I know you've all been to those things. I mean, they're great events. I mean, they really are. So, almost permission for bottom lip to wobble. They're really encouraging. And the sadness is, of course, in this climate, is that none of the parents or friends, relations, or whatever it is are able to attend. Because, anyway, they were a great lot, and it looks good for the future. On the 7th of July, I attended the fire cadets at Rushmore and opened it for the Lord Lieutenant of Hampshire. And again, sad because the parents weren't there because of COVID. But actually, Ros and I spoke to a lot of the parents who'd come to pick up their offspring, and really the bubble and the joy and the pride that they showed in what their children were doing and how their children had changed was really most encouraging. Most encouraging. On 20th of July, I attended an LGA Conservative White Paper discussion, which was interesting. And yesterday, the Chief and I attended an HMI Chiefs and Chairs meeting, which had about 121 people on it, I think, which again was interesting. And those issues we will discuss next week at our APAG meeting. I also want to just say that to extend our thanks to the service for their ongoing efforts around COVID-19 in helping our population. Working with our health partners, a number of our fire stations have opened grab and jab opportunities for people who have yet to get their vaccine, and to date these have been very successful. So well done, the fire service. I mean, one of the things I'm determined to do is up the image of the fire service, and things like this really help us, just to show people what we do contribute to national life. Chief, anything you want to add?
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks for those comments. And you'll be aware Basingstoke continues to be a major centre for vaccinations also, but the grab-a-jab opportunity for fire services to use our brand to encourage normally the younger people who are perhaps more reluctant to come forward, and we've been delighted to help out our health colleagues in that regard, using our brand to encourage people to do it. So, yeah, it's great to help out.
Thank you. Item 6, then, members' developments. Councillor Ros Chad.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to mention our visit to Rushmore Fire Station to meet the cadets, and how thankful I am personally from being from that area to all our volunteers that are working so hard with those young people, and it was amazing, and the joy on those young people's faces actually of being part of a group and doing something. And that evening it was a very important football match was being played that evening, and to have full attendance at that cadet movement was just amazing and great to see. So thank you to all our volunteers within the cadets.
Thanks, Ros. Anybody else? Members' development? Councillor Jonathan Glenn.
Just to remind everybody that tomorrow and Thursday we have 2 Prince's Trust teams performing, or should I say, having their presentations. There's Team 55 on the 28th and Team 31 on the 29th at Basingstoke. These are also great events to attend. And if you are in any doubt as to how to get into them, they're Teams events, Megan Brackley is the person to look up on your computer. You might find out how to get access to those events. I really would recommend at least you try one. Can I also say, with regards to your comments about Basingstoke Fire Station, absolutely brilliant service there, and I'm glad to say that my son, who is still awaiting his second jab, has had his jab brought forward, and he's having it at the Basingstoke Fire Station. So I'm sure he'll get wonderful service.
Thank you. Anybody else? Roger.
Thank you. So it's just a report that I have been attending on behalf of Keith Aspin, who is the Liberal Democrat lead on the Fire Service Management Committee. He couldn't attend, so I've been attending meetings with the Home Office on the fire spending review, which have been quite interesting, of looking forward of how trying to analyse what the improvements we can make and what we can show so that we can get the right amount of money out of the grants and what have you from the Home Office. And this is a document which is being prepared to go on to Treasury, and hopefully Treasury will agree with it. That will be the burning question, I think. And there is another meeting this morning about that, which I couldn't attend. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any more? No? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 7. This is the Outturn Report 2020 and 21, to be presented by Rob Carr, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. Just a quick introduction to the report. So we ended the year with a £2.2 million underspend, but against that we have got carry forward requests of around 600,000, so leaving a net balance of 1.6 million to transfer to reserves. And the recommendation in the report is to transfer half of that to the capital payments reserve and half to the transformation reserve. Don't need to remind everybody, in paragraph 6, the year was obviously dominated by COVID-19 and our response. So we did have costs of about £1.2 million during the year as a result of COVID, but that was more than covered by government grant of 1.8 million. So we carried the balance forward, the 600,000, because obviously the response didn't stop at the 31st of March 2021, and we're utilising that money as part of the response for the rest of this year. So the carry forward requests are outlined in paragraph 9. So again, most of those are as a result of delays due to COVID-19, the most significant of which was training courses, which were obviously suspended during the year because we weren't able to put them in place. So that's created a bit of a backlog. So the aim is to spend that money to get rid of the backlog during this year. Just looking at the capital expenditure, so we spent £2 million last year. If I can draw your attention to paragraph 14, you'll see the funding of the capital spend there, virtually all of which comes from the capital payments reserve. And that just highlights the point that I've made to you in the past. We receive no money at all from government towards our capital investment. So we create that money ourselves through contributions each year. As you can see, nearly £2 million came from the capital payments reserve to fund spend in the year. Just coming down to paragraph 19 and provisions, and grateful to the chairman for asking a question in his chairman's brief, which I have been investigating and got the answer to, and basically you are quite right to have queried that. So the description that we've got there isn't really reflective of what that insurance provision is for. So effectively, when we talk about the authorities insurers going into liquidation, that was some time ago. So like you, I was surprised that we were still receiving claims against that sort of timing. So looking at it, the most of that provision is there to cover the liabilities for which we do have insurance for employee liability, but this is the excess that we have to pay on those as part of our arrangements with Frick. So that explains why we get quite a lot of movement on that still, because we obviously get claims each year. So obviously I will change that wording for the next time we do the report. Just moving down to reserves and balances, so paragraph 22 does set out the use of our reserves during the year. And I think one of the points that we make quite strongly to Home Office and MHCLG is that whilst our level of reserves has remained pretty consistent at around £30 million for a number of years now, you'll see from that table that that is a combination of contributions to the reserves and then the use of them, £6.5 million last year. Now, as you would expect, we tend to make the contributions in advance of spending the money, so it is likely that our reserves are always going to be at a reasonable level, but at the end of the day, those all are earmarked for a specific purpose. They're not available to prop up the revenue budget. Just in paragraph 23 there is a proportion of the Isle of Wight council reserves that will come across to us. As part of the business case, I think we predicted that those would be around 800,000. So Isle of Wight are in the process of closing their accounts, but at the moment we do think that will be around 900,000, so slightly above what we were expecting. That was all I was going to draw attention to, Chairman, but very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Members, any questions? Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Rob, on page 12, provisions, paragraph 19, on A, the provisions for uninsurable and other claims, as the £30,000 increase was gone into that pot. What I couldn't find anywhere is that what is that the total of that pot standing at the moment? Where is it? Because I can't find it. I'm sure it's in here somewhere, but I couldn't find it. I have another question on B in a moment.
So I don't think in the report it does say what the total pot is, but Catherine's hopefully quickly looking that up for me. Yeah, if we find it, I'll come back to you. But if not, we'll answer that later.
Thank you. And on B is that and this is obviously for what has happened during the end of the last financial year, is we decrease the amount of money going into the pot for the liabilities on pensions. What is happening going forward? Because pension liability, as you know and I know, is one of the big risks that there are. And so we've decreased it. And again, is what do we actually have in that pot? And also, what are we looking at doing for the future about the risks that which we, I think, are pretty sure are coming our way if the government doesn't put the money in?
Yep, so that particular provision is specifically for the temporary promotion issue, which you recall we had back in 2016. So you recall that we protected people who are on temporary promotion to protect their pension rights. So that decrease is the fact that some people have retired during the year, and we've used that provision to pay what they were due in terms of their lump sum. So over time that will come down to zero. In terms of other pension liabilities such as MacLeod and around the modified scheme, we don't have any specific provisions for those because we have no idea what the potential liability will be. But our expectation is that if there is anything significant coming out of that, we will look to the government to fund that. But at the moment, there's nothing specific which we need to draw attention to in terms of either MacLeod or the modified scheme. And Catherine's just sent me-
Councillor David Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. Two, if that's all right. Firstly, on funding sources for some capital spend. I appreciate borrowing money to fund large capital expenditures, but there's £12,000 borrowed for Redbridge, and that seems a small amount to go through the hassle of organising borrowing for when we've got an underspend of 1.6 million. And I appreciate the difference between capital and revenue, but as I understand it, you can use revenue to fund capital. So is there any particular reason we didn't just fund that and save ourselves the rigmarole of organising borrowing?
Yep, good question. So Redbridge is part of the station investment programme, and the authority have agreed that all of that will be met from prudential borrowing. This is always a bit of a difficult one to explain. The fact that we say that is coming from prudential borrowing doesn't mean to say that we take that out at the point in time. So we will use our reserves to fund that temporarily, but at some point we will then take out prudential borrowing. It was just the way that the phasing happened that we only spent £12,000 on that scheme. So yes, we will wait and take out a large lump of prudential borrowing effectively once our cash starts to run out. But at the moment, we internally borrow for that amount. Have you got another one? Yep.
That's fine. This might sit less with you, actually. One of the underspends is staffing costs, including of whole-time firefighters. I appreciate we can't just magic new firefighters out the air and we have to have training courses, but is this an unexpected underspend in terms of whole-time firefighters retiring early or just not being around? And what impact has that had on the service?
Not entirely sure. Is it linked to the fact that we haven't been able to recruit? Yeah.
So there is a bit of phasing. So 20-week course to bring in firefighters and the recruitment that goes along prior to that. So that phasing of trying to bring people in at the right moment is partly why some of those don't completely align. Also, what we've been trying to do is on the stations to look at running as efficiently as possible on all the shift stations. So that involves some of the crewing discussions that go on. So on a daily basis, there's no difference in terms of the number of firefighters on duty. It just might mean that the establishment doesn't always reflect, if you like, the numbers, and they'll get topped up. So our recruits that are finishing last week will obviously go into that pot, and that will become less.
If I may, Chairman, just to come back to Councillor Price. So the insurance provision stands at 116,000 and the pension liabilities provisions 136,000.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Chairman, and I would like to repeat my congratulations to Rob Carr on his promotion. And I'm really glad he's with us for at least one more year. Just as a handover. With regards to his comments about the COVID-related costs of 1.245 and what we've got from the government of 1.840, which we've all worked out, leaves us a very nice balance of 0.6 million. For the record, because I don't think it came out in his report, in what he was saying, is that that's being put into the grants unapplied reserve to support future COVID costs, and it doesn't form part of the net underspend of the 1.6. So that basically means that if there is an upsurge in COVID and we have to do more as a service, I presume that money can be utilised very quickly to pay for that. Would that be right, Rob?
Yep, that's correct.
My second question, how much do we actually have in the grants unapplied reserve at the moment?
I'm not sure, but I suspect it will just be that 600,000.
That's just that. Okay, thank you.
Members, any further questions? Rob, any closing remark?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Members, if I can draw your attention to the recommendations on page 15, which are that the outturn position of 2021, including Appendix A and the use of reserves set out in paragraph 22 and Appendix C of this report be approved by the HIWFRA full authority. Agreed. Secondly, that the carry forward request totalling 551,000 as set out in paragraph 9 of this report be approved by the HIWFRA full authority. Agreed. That the capital outturn position 2021 and the capital spend profile going forward set out in Appendix B be approved by the full authority. Agreed. That the financing of the capital payment set out in paragraph 14 be approved by the full authority. Agreed. And that the annual Treasury outturn report set out in Appendix D of this report be approved by the full authority. Agreed. Thank you. Turning to item 8 on your agenda, the annual pay policy statement report. Molly Rowland, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Hope you can all hear me okay. So many of you will be familiar with this report. It's an annual report that we publish every year, but it is a requirement under the Localism Act of 2011 that it's considered by the full Fire Authority and subsequently published. The legislation is very clear in respect of what must be included in a pay policy statement, and the outline of that can be found at section 5 of the report. And much of this relates to the pay of the Chief Fire Officer. And you will find that all of those items are covered in the pay policy statement, which is attached to Appendix A. As in previous years, we have chosen to extend slightly beyond the requirements of the legislation to include not only the Chief Fire Officer's salary in our pay policy statement, but also all of those who report directly to the Chief Fire Officer and are employed by Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service. So that includes all of the director posts. So that's stayed the same. The legislation also requires that the pay policy statement is published as soon as possible after it's been approved by the Fire Authority, and we publish it on our website. And by doing so, we ensure that we meet our obligations in terms of transparency and allow the public and other key stakeholders, such as trade union groups or employees, to have access and to scrutinise the pay frameworks that we use. I wasn't intending to run through any of the detail within the pay policy statement, but I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Molly. Members, any questions? Councillor Derek Mellor, please.
Thank you, Chair. May I just ask how standard this is with other authorities in terms of a pay policy?
It's very standard. All authorities might differ slightly and include some different information depending on the pay frameworks that they use or the remuneration policies that they have in place. So because we adhere to the national pay frameworks and we don't apply any bonuses or things like that, we don't have to include reference to those. But if you did, you would need to include reference to them. But they are fairly standard reports across all local authorities.
Okay, thank you.
Members, any more questions? No? Sorry, David.
Just a quick one. And I appreciate this is not the easiest topic to talk about. In the background, it talks about increased transparency around how taxpayers' money is used, but it doesn't actually say how this relates to last year's pay offer. So in terms of how this sits in comparison to last year's pay policy statement, is it just the statement itself rather than the appendix? If that makes sense. Obviously, the salaries are at the back, but there's no relation to how that sits to last year.
Sorry, just for clarity in terms of the question, do you mean in terms of the national pay awards that were...
Well, yeah, so our senior roles are in the appendix at the back
Yes.
with just a figure, but it doesn't allow us to compare that to last year, just as a transparency for taxpayers' money.
Okay. We could include that in future reports. I don't think we remove the reports, so they stay as a kind of archived history of the salary increase.
That'd be helpful for future years, that's all.
Okay, thank you. No more questions, members? If I can draw your attention to the recommendation on page 40, that Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approve the pay policy statement at Appendix A for publication on Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority Services website. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving to item 9, the Fire Services Carbon Reductions Pathway Report. This is on page 45. Matt Robertson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. So the paper in front of you seeks to establish a new carbon reduction pathway for the authority and obviously therefore the service. So this is in recognition of government trajectory and legislation around being net zero across the country by 2050, and in particular within legislation stating for public bodies, including local authorities and ourselves as a fire authority, to meet that target. So in order to do that, the paper sets out the first steps needed as part of that programme, which is to start to invest some money in the infrastructure to enable our pathway journey to commence. So the recommendations late in the report, one is to ask approval to set that target. So should we be on a trajectory to align with net zero and the government's current targets? And then secondly, are we going to then approve funding that programme? So in paragraph 4, that just summarises the initial funding of just short of 1.1 million. 900,000 of that is for installation of electric vehicle charging points across strategic sites on the estate. And then 4B is for some fees to understand the estate infrastructure better in terms of the investment that will then be needed to decarbonise the estate. So predominantly that's around different heating and insulation and the likes across the estate, but the surveys will allow us to better understand what is needed to the investment on the estate side. And then paragraph 5 is equally as important, which is to deliver all of that. We need to establish a post in our estates team to oversee the scale of the work needed over the next between now and the first milestone, which is 2035, so a significant period of time. So there's 43,000 being asked for there, and that's not one-off. That would be a recurring cost. And then worth noting, paragraph 6, as I alluded to, particularly around the estate work, we will need to come back should the authority approve this initial stage today and outline the investment needed over the next 10 years, predominantly on the estate, but also look forward towards 2050, which is the current trajectory. It is worth noting that at recent climate summits, the Prime Minister has indicated that the 2050 net zero may be brought forward to 2035, but that is currently not a legislative requirement. It remains 2035. So our pathway is aligned to the current legislation rather than at this stage bringing it forward. But clearly, if that was to change, that would speed up the trajectory currently within this paper. So it's on page 46, the background section. It's worth noting that this is not starting from nothing. We have, and the authority have got a long history of positive investment in reducing the impact on the environment, predominantly around much more renewable energy. And you'll see there we've achieved since 2012 a 30% reduction in our carbon emissions already as a service. That is entirely due to the estate. So using, we have some biomass boilers, we have solar PV, solar panels you can see on this building and across a number of other sites. But you'll see in the appendix that the Carbon Trust, who have worked with our teams in assessing what is our current carbon footprint, what is our baseline to start with, have still indicated that 57, so we'll call it 60% of our carbon emissions remains from our estate. So we're still producing 60% of our emissions from our buildings. And that is what we need the updated reports for, to understand how we tackle that 60%. And then 40% is from our vehicles, which is no surprise. We have a fleet of over 400 vehicles, ranging from light vehicles, cars and what have you, through to vans, and obviously fire appliances, which are obviously heavy goods vehicle classification. So we have a very range of vehicles, virtually all of which, with the exception of around 6 are fully combustion engines. So we have around 6 hybrid, we have around 4 hybrid and around 2 electric vehicles currently. So a lot of work then to be done in that 40% on the vehicles. So predominantly the paper's focused on those two things. So you'll see paragraph 47 just outlines some extracts from the Carbon Trust report. I wasn't going to fixate too much on the figures because they're rather technical, but it in effect, to meet net zero in paragraph 15, there are various different options, so 4 options that could be explored around doing absolutely nothing, so maintain where we currently are, and just continue as we do now. Option 2, which is to meet a global 2% reduction in temperatures, but option 3 is the one that meets the UK national target, where the government's ambition is to beat that 2% as a country and lead some of the environmental and green initiatives. So that's currently the one that's in legislation for public bodies to meet. And then option 4 is we could take the decision to go better than that and seek to do better than that. And some other public organisations are certainly in that space. We're not, as you can see in the recommendation, not recommending that at this stage for reasons outlined later in the report. And instead, the recommendation is to focus on aligning with the net zero for 2050. It's important to note that, whatever the authority decides today, with that target being set there, failure to act now will make the line, obviously, in those graphs much steeper at whatever point we decide we need to act and do something to start reducing our carbon footprint. So it will therefore become increasingly more difficult and obviously increasingly more costly to catch up. And there is a risk, as I said at the beginning, that the 2050 date is brought forward in some guise, whether it's 2035 or 2040, which will inevitably also exacerbate that position. So in paragraph 18, in order for us to meet that UK national target, we need to reduce our carbon footprint from what it is today by 24% by 2030. And in order to do that, which is in paragraph 19, there are 4 key things being recommended through this report. One is to start to electrify the fleet. The second one is to improve the building fabric and heat sort of fueling, if you like, from our estate. The 19C and 19D we're already doing. So in effect, this is around designing into new buildings more carbon reduction mechanisms. So using grey water, for example. So we've mentioned Redbridge Fire Station this morning already, and Cosham and Bishop's Waltham. They will all meet BREEAM accreditation for sustainability and will all feature as part of our carbon reduction sort of plans, if you like, for those buildings to be heated and cooled in ways that is much more environment friendly, as a number of you have seen. I appreciate not all of you in the business cases that came last year. And then behavioural change in staff is very minor. So corporately, there isn't a massive focus on it, but there are things around changing commuting behaviours, energy use and things like that, which are sort of secondary to where we'll see some of the gains around fleet and estate in effect. So the paper then outlines what we're aiming to do, particularly around the fleet and the estate. So the estate's the surveys, and the fleet is to start putting in these electric charging points. It's worth noting that clearly we can't start buying electric vehicles until we can charge them up. So not having the charging points will mean our fleet colleagues are unable to start to replace our vehicles with either hybrid or fully electric vehicles. So having this infrastructure in place enables them to start procuring, thinking for the future. Whereas if we don't do that, they will only obviously be able to use combustion engines. And we know, and we'll all know in this room, that the government has already legislated the ban of new combustion engines on light vehicles by 2035. And last week they also announced a consultation of the ban of heavy goods vehicles also from 2035 up to 26 tonnes, which would include a fire engine. So if that was also brought in and there was no exemptions for that, then 2035 would be a date where we would, in theory, if we don't start to think about how we're going to power these vehicles, we would not be able to buy another vehicle from 2035. So that becomes clearly a problem. So there is an element of needing to move forward with this and be proactive in the space. So the under page 51, under resource implications, how we're going to, in effect, pay for this should you approve it. The intention is to take the money from the reserve, and by reprofiling some of our existing capital programs. So in effect, we have capital money already approved from the authority, which we know in the sort of last few years, for various reasons, some due to COVID, some due to procurement and markets, we have not spent those budgets. So that money, in effect, is no longer required within the years in which it was allocated. So there is an opportunity to reallocate that surplus money rather than putting it, in effect, back into a reserve. So that would help fund the capital investment, and clearly the revenue costs will add a pressure in those revenue years for the resource in particular, which would have to be managed through the budget setting process. Paragraph 42 is also pertinent. Obviously, there are some grants out there, and many of you will be aware of those grants, no doubt, with other roles, and we will seek to utilise those where possible. The vast majority of that money, so my team explained it as 80-20, so around 80% of the money, the 900 being sought for electric charging points, is not for the post that you physically see. It is for in-the-ground cabling, ductwork, distribution boards, switchboards. It's the cabling and that infrastructure which is necessary, and then you plug the post in. The post itself is relatively cheap, so it's much more for the other element of the work, which clearly will be future-proofing our estate, but is expensive work to dig up tarmac yards and what have you. So that's. You can't get grants for that bit. You can get the grants for the plug-in stands or whatever else you might want to have. So we will seek the grants where we can get them. The last bit I just cast your eye over is in paragraph 50, page 54, sorry, which just summarises the four options. And predominantly the reason that we're suggesting not to do option A and option B is that both of those will fail to meet the UK national target of net zero by 2050. The do nothing will be 30% over that by the time we get to that point, and also in option 2 will equally be over. So equally with option 4, going for a higher investment, so seek to better the UK target. The concern there is that it's quite a high risk strategy, so it will require significant investment up front, and actually for what we think we can actually achieve in the timeframes, the current government target is quite ambitious enough. So that's probably enough for me. Hopefully members will have some questions. Very happy to take.
Thank you, Matt. Can I ask? I'm sort of responsible for the electric vehicles in the county council, and we have difficulty in getting the appropriate electric vehicle for the size we want for heavy goods because they don't seem to be around. I'm not entirely sure what an electric fire engine is going to look like without towing 5 generators or something. I mean, I know they're working on it. We are doing quite a lot of work with what is called hydro-treated vegetable oil, because that's quite good stuff because it mixes with diesel anyway and is much cleaner stuff. Are you talking to HTM?
Yep.
Hampshire Transport Management?
Yep. So a few things there. So the heavy goods vehicle technology is not where it needs to be for us to have confidence in investing in that currently. So this is purely the first step. As I say, it's around the infrastructure, which will predominantly help light good vehicles, so vans, which we have a large fleet for, and cars, so officer cars, for example, that respond to incidents. Those vehicles, so light vehicles. Heavy goods vehicles, we're currently watching the technology develop. So, for example, London Fire Brigade have a vehicle on trial, and we are on a steering group nationally. Our fleet lead sits on that steering group, where they're trialling the technology. But at the moment, it's not widespread, and I understand that there's, for example, there's a heavy goods vehicle, so I think it's around 18-ton vehicle that's fully electric and being trialled, but the manufacturer won't release ranges or things like that at this point in time. But the charging requirement for that is my understanding is quite significant. So at the minute, this is not the focus that we're on at this point in time. It could be hydrogen or other sources, as you pointed out, that could be added to either diesel or what have you. But ultimately, if the ban on sale by 2035, even adding anything into diesel would be illegal from new vehicles, so it would have to be a purely renewable powered vehicle. So that is the challenge. So I think at this point in time it's a watch and see and let the technology catch up, rather than us trying to buy electric vehicles at this point in time.
As I said, do talk to HTM because I think they're already using vegetable oil.
Yep, sorry, I forgot to answer that. Yep, so we are engaged with the county and HTM and the constabulary, as I think is also mentioned in the paper, around the constabulary engagement, particularly around light vehicles, and also nationally through the NFCC, the National Fire Chiefs Council, transport group network as well. So looking at all fire rescue services that obviously want the same technology, and how we influence the manufacturers or others through that. So absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Questions from members? Roger.
Thank you. It's more of a statement rather than questions at this stage, is that from our side is that we agree totally with the principle of this. The environment is something which we've all got to take on board, and we've got to reduce our carbon footprint. There's no doubt about that. I think that if we look at the options, we support the option 3, but would like to say is that we believe that we should have aspirations to actually achieve the item 4, because we've really got to push as much as we can on carbon reduction. Now, having said that, is that I think within the report, and I couldn't pick up anything about Winchester and Basingstoke fire stations, which are both fairly new, and I think are more or less pretty well up to standard. Winchester may be a little bit further behind than Basingstoke because it was built a little bit earlier. So I think that probably those don't need an awful lot doing to them to bring them totally up to standard. I think we need also to be looking at the vehicles which we have. We need an audit of all the vehicles we have to see how many we've got. Do we really need all of those? Can they be shared? And there's a number of questions which, in auditing them, is to see what is the need? What do we really need going forward? And also, we've got to look at the difference in the capital costs of electric against conventional. Now, as I would see it, might be wrong, is that purely electric vehicles, with the development of them, the cost is going to come down. It's not going to stay as high as it is at the moment, because if the government's aspirations to have everybody going over to electric vehicles, they're going to have to bring the cost down because people won't be able to afford them. So that affects us as well. So the cost is going to have to come down, and I'm sure it will do over time as developments take place. And I think regarding fire appliances, a large vehicle base, which that's built upon, the same as any ordinary lorry, is an ordinary lorry just goes from A to B, basically, and has no other real use for electrical usage within it. Whereas a fire appliance, as you alluded to, Mr. Chairman, is that they're going to a fire ground, may not be travelling very far in distance, but when they're there, they could be there for a large number of hours, way into 10s and 12 hours if it's a major instance, and their engine is going all the time, because we do have at the moment, as I believe to be correct, from maintenance department, is that they can go and deliver fuel to appliances which are pumping all the time, and therefore there is a need to get fuel to them, because if they're running out of fuel because the engine's going all the time, then they need the fuel. You can't do that with a long cable to charge it. So there's going to have to be some sort of differences for a fire appliance. And I think, my own view, though London may have the one, I think it's a long way off before we actually get to something which is going to be satisfactory and suitable. So I think that the principle, totally agree with, like to see us having aspirations to achieve 4. And it's also an area where I think that we ought to consider having a member champion, because to me this is the future of the planet and the future going ahead. So if we actually had a member champion who could get involved with the details or with the officers about it, because as has been said by the officer, is that this is the bones. There's a lot of meat to go on this to actually understand what is going to happen and the developments that are going to take place in the future. So even though this says put up all these charging points, are they really going to be necessary in the end? Will there be developments in hydrogen? Will hydrogen be the main fuel for vehicles in the future? None of us know. And so I think that there's an awful lot behind this which we need to be making sure we keep totally abreast of, rather than jumping in and going down a particular road to actually achieve something. regarding the actual buildings, I would hope we know enough about buildings that installation of buildings, heating systems within them would automatically be happening anyway within our maintenance of buildings. So that should be ongoing. And so that's a much easier area to deal with. But regarding vehicles, I think none of us really know where we're going. So I think it's enough for me to start with.
Thank you. I'll come back to members' champions in a minute. Any other members? Gary.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for the report. I had great interest in reading it, but I have to make a confession. My confession is I'm coming in at this as a rendezvous because I'm a new member to the board. I'm not fully aware of what's happened in the past for me to understand how we've got to where we are today. But when I read this report, I have to say I'm quite alarmed. I'm very happy to sign up for the survey of all of the buildings. Very sensible, very pragmatic. I'm very happy to sign up for the staff member to oversee and look at this. I really have concerns about the idea of spending £900,000 on 104 electric vehicle charging points. I took the time to read the paper from the Carbon Trust. I was alarmed by the huge number of assumptions that are in that document because they say a certain number of things. So if I may, I'm going to ask some questions which I'm sorry I never gave in advance, but I think they may be relevant to us determining what you're proposing is pragmatic and sensible to move forward. Am I right, there's 377 non-operational vehicles?
Yeah, roughly around that, yeah.
This is a cheeky question. I suspect you don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to ask anyway. What is the average annual mileage of those vehicles?
You're right, I don't know the answer.
That's quite key because of a total whole life cost of electric vehicles based on economics alone says that to get the return on them, you must achieve at least 12,000 miles a year. That's fact. Last year, electric vehicles were averaging about 7,000 miles a year. So is that a good return on your investment? Is that a good spend of public money? In the Carbon Trust paper, they talk about average installation of charging points between 500 and 1,500 to £2,500. Yet you're asking for £900,000 for 104 charging points, which works out nearly £9,000 each. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, so the £500 is for the post. So that's the post and the connection piece. The bit that this is funding is distribution boards, the cabling to the posts, which obviously if the technology changes from having plug-in posts to having something else, you can take the post off and put the next thing in. So so there's a hidden cost, which obviously manufacturers of charging posts don't want you to see. But yeah, so that's why that is higher.
Okay. May I continue? Thank you. What is the fire authorities, the fire services policy in respect to vehicles? Do you lease them or do you purchase them?
So we currently own all of our vehicles.
And would that be the policy moving forward with electric vehicles?
So there's different trails of thoughts on how we might procure the actual vehicle. So it could be that we purchase some, and it could be that we look at some leased options depending on the vehicle. So, for example, some of the light vehicles that are used for officer cars could be leased. So that's sort of slightly separate from this point in that this is about the infrastructure rather than how we buy the vehicles. And clearly the teams would be looking at what's the most economical way of purchasing those vehicles, which might be a combination of leased and owned.
Am I right in thinking, though, that electrical charging points are not agnostic? They are specific to a particular vehicle?
So they're not standardised, but you can get different cabling and everything else. So you don't need to buy the post for that exact vehicle. Although obviously manufacturers will sell one for their vehicle. You can get more universal ones, but you'll have different leads or what have you. We think the next phase in the technology will be the standardization of charging posts and pay mechanisms in that technology, which currently, you're correct, isn't standardized, but the posts we have now are fairly universal and virtually all cars will connect to them. On the cost point, your electric car, you're right, electric cars travel a lot less because probably with the people who buy electric cars currently in a commercial world are buying them for short trips, which is obviously not how we use the predominantly of our vehicles. And the intention here is to phase in vehicle replacement. So we will continue to have combustion engines and get the return on that investment by taking ones with higher mileage, decommissioning those and recirculating lower mileage, and then bringing in hybrid or electric cars behind. But with the expectation will be that those vehicles would still need to be used in the same guise as our combustion engine vehicles are currently in terms of the return on investment angle. Equally, the way in which we procure those vehicles means that we've now the premium, if you like, on an electric or a hybrid vehicle compared to a combustion is much more reduced than it would be if you or I went to a dealer and tried to buy one, where we're buying it in a different way. It's much more reduced and much more competitive and comparable. So there's a benefit there in terms of electricity being considerably cheaper to purchase currently per unit than our diesel can be, but obviously it depends on the economies.
So, thanks, Matt. That's not what the Carbon Trust report says. It says the discounts on on diesel and petrol vehicles are about 20%. The best you're going to get on electric vehicles between 6 and 7%. Did I read that incorrectly?
No, but the Carbon Trust is giving their view on it. Where we have the relationships with manufacturers, that isn't the case for us. So it is the case as a generalisation, that is the case. And certainly with light good vehicles, so if you're looking at, as in not a car, as in a transit van wheelbase, it is considerably higher, but we wouldn't at this point be advocating buying those. With light vehicles, as in cars, the price is much more reduced. It's much more competitive when we bulk buy and we negotiate with manufacturers through our procurement frameworks. But the Carbon Trust is right in the generalisation that the vehicles are a higher purchase price.
One final question, if I may, Chair. Thank you. I read all this, fantastic. Spend all this money, install all this infrastructure, and you could save 11% per year. As a return on investment, and as a business case, does that stand up?
And that will be predominantly partly to do with the vehicles that will be being charged by this current initial 100 charging posts. So obviously a bulk, if you look at our fleet makeup, that 43%, the largest amount of carbon emissions is obviously quite naturally on the biggest vehicles, and this is not currently tackling those vehicles at all. It is starting the journey of putting the infrastructure in so that we can tackle them, but that's not what's being articulated in this paper at this point in time. There will need to be a subsequent look at when that technology, as we've discussed earlier, picks up, how we roll in heavy goods vehicles in a different way.
Thank you, Matt. Would the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire Authority consider themselves early adopters of this technology, or are you coming in at this or the midpoint, or are you a late adopter?
Sorry, was that okay? I wasn't sure if you were asking your colleagues. I guess that is the question being posed by the paper: is would you like to adopt net zero by 2035? In terms of nationally, others are in this place, so other fire authorities, Manchester, for example, London's actually going further than the government's targets, have started the journey, so have local authorities, so have the NHS nationally, so other public bodies are starting the journey. But obviously the question here in the paper is, does Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority want to start that journey to net zero?
Thank you, Gary. David.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. As a returning member, I'm very pleased to see that this is on the agenda. It's not new greening, it's a continuation of carbon reduction programmes that were in existence when I was a member. I support the funding request. I think it's part of the international and national fight against climate change. We are in the business of public safety, and I'm sure members will switch on the evening news and see pictures of disasters in Belgium, Germany, California, and wonder, quite what would happen if organisations like us don't become early adopters and treat this issue very seriously. I think we have a leadership role. We are part of the national jigsaw puzzle, but we are a particularly important part of that jigsaw puzzle. And as such, I support the paper. I support what's behind it. I am attracted by the idea that a member should become an environmental champion. I think if we're asking staff members to appoint environmental champions, then it kind of sits well that we are part of that process as well, and maybe there could be sort of regular liaison meetings between the staff environmental champions and the champion that we appoint. I don't think it necessarily has to involve a special responsibility allowance. It could be someone who's enthusiastic about this project and would give it a little bit of a push. Because I think it's a good example, as with health and safety, if you get buy-in from everybody in the organisation, it's more likely to succeed. I agree that option 3 is probably the one that we should aim for, but I just want to introduce the idea that instead of having a kind of a blanket aim that applies to all of the geography that we look after, perhaps we could consider a sort of an enhancement to one of the areas. It could be the Isle of Wight, it could be the precious New Forest, which I know well. Members might want to consider other specific areas, but I think that there are advantages in doing something different in some specific areas, because you can learn lessons by so doing. Some things may succeed, some things may fail, but if you trial it in one area and find it's a great success, then you can roll it out further. So I think the organisation as a whole would benefit from that sort of approach. But Chairman, I'm interested in other members' thoughts on this, and I'd simply say in response to Councillor Hughes, who's taken very much a sort of a financial take on this, nothing wrong in that at all, but against a business case, you also have to weigh up the environmental case. And I'm always I always try and balance the two things, because if you're purely business focused and the planet dies as a result, then we all know where we are. Thank you, Chairman.
Let me just ask, there are hands up for, thank you, David. Jonathan?
I would suggest, Chairman, you let everybody else, because we're all developing our thoughts on this, Chairman, and I think, in my opinion, nobody's going to be wrong on this. We are looking at really a brainstorming at the moment, and what I wanted to say was, I don't disagree with the thoughts that I've just heard from Councillor Hughes, okay? Everyone's entitled to their intellectual opinion as to the right way forward. So I totally accept everything that's been said from a financial point of view. I also accept everything that David Harrison has said, which was very interesting. We're talking about a leap of faith here. That's what this is, because it's an unknown. Now, if I can go back to our history, if Sir Francis Drake had said when he saw the Armada coming, well, hang on, guys, I want to wait until I get a better warship. I want an ironclad frigate. We'd all be discussing this in Spanish. And if Sir Nelson had said at Trafalgar, I want an aircraft carrier, please, I'm going to wait a few hundred years, we'd be discussing this in French. So you have to actually step in at some point, and this leap of faith, and invest. Now, it could be done in a one-off trial pilot scheme. I'm not against that in principle. You just have to choose the right place, learn a few lessons. So, what's happening in the County Council? It's been brought up by the Cabinet already in a Cabinet meeting. It was a private Cabinet meeting. I have stated that this is very much a scrutiny function, because a huge amount of work has to be done and a lot of questions have to be asked, some of which have been brought forward by Gary here. Okay, so I've already instructed my facilitating officer to put it on the agenda, which will be listened to by all the chairmen of all the select committees. At that point, decisions will be made as to whether this has to be spread out to all the select committees, because it's not just an overarching area of the county. It's specific to environment, transport, and economy. It's specific to purchasing. It's a huge area. So it will take time. But I'll tell you, if other fire services are basically addressing this, we must address it too. We mustn't be found counting. And I live in hope that there are thousands of people listening in to this meeting. I think if we had virtual meetings, we'd actually get hundreds listening in on a subject like this. Because if we don't address this, we're going to get a backlash from quite a number of interested people complaining about the inadequacy and the blindness of the fire service. And I don't want that to happen either. And the final thing I'd like to say, going back to my examples, why should the fire service have ever got involved in providing cover for COVID? It's not actually the job of a fire service to do that, but we did. We did it because we wanted to save lives. We did it because we wanted to make people impervious to the COVID virus. And that was more important than actually saying, oh, no, we just put out fires and we help people out of their cars on the motorway. It's a leap of faith, and I'm prepared to take it.
Thank you. Jonathan. Gary, you wanted to say something else?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I suppose my point is that if 57% of our carbon is lost in our buildings and our infrastructure, I would much rather accelerate the surveys of all of our buildings, and you want to get quick wins and reduce your carbon footprint quickly, invest money in our buildings and infrastructure first, but at the same time monitor the market in terms of electric vehicles, infrastructure, etc. And therefore, when we go in with greater knowledge and experience and then spend the money there. So I'm not saying we shouldn't spend the money, I'm just saying let's focus on the points where we know we can make a big difference with biomass boilers, solar panels, ground source heat pumps. We've got 2 new stations coming online where we believe the installation will be wonderful and their carbon footprint will be significantly reduced. Let's focus on that part first and watch the market, and if the opportunities arise, then we dive in and start doing this stuff. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying if you want to reduce your carbon footprint quickly, this is possibly not the quickest way to do it.
Any other members want to say something? David.
Thank you, Chairman. I sort of take a middle ground between Councillor Harrison and Councillor Hughes on this. I think everyone would agree with the principle of what we're trying to achieve here, and I have no doubt this report will get support today. My only concern is around the overall cost of that particular item, the electric vehicle charging points. And the reason I say that is because you have given me some assurance that it's not just the cost of sticking a post in the ground, but it still seems excessive to achieve 100 charging points is going to cost £1 million in effect. So my sort of ask is that can we have some detail on the background of how that figure was arrived at? Have other things been considered? You spoke about digging up tarmac, overhead cabling, ducting around walls rather than going into the ground, all sorts of things to make this cheaper. Simply because I don't even have an issue with spending £1 million, but if we can spend 500,000 on this and then we have 500,000 to spend on better insulation at a fire station, then actually we're going to achieve our end goal quicker with less money. And I know from experience that if you set a budget, people tend to try and meet the budget rather than come under the budget. So I just want some clarity around how that figure was arrived at and what safeguards are in place to make sure actually we achieve what we're trying to achieve with less money rather than trying to come in at the budget.
Yep. So that figure is using a framework. So which we use. So there's 2 angles to that. One is around how you buy the actual posts, and one is then the infrastructural work around that. Clearly, and you have stolen the thunder from it slightly, but clearly it's a budget rather than a target. So it has in there some contingency allowance. However, for context, on page 51 of your pack, where there is a table which doesn't give you granular detail of how that figure is calculated, you can see there that one line item for upgrades to the electrical cabling and distribution boards of our fleet maintenance centre is just shy of 100,000. So that's one building, one site. But appreciate that is the biggest site where all the workshops are maintained. So so that starts to allow that, if that's rolled out against our whole-time sites and predominantly in the rest of this building, that is the reason. The most of the work is electrical work, so it's not the posts, it's cabling and everything else, and obviously how that would be done will be done in the most economic way. So chances are it will be ducting internally, and then it will need to go underground externally, however, due to the voltage. But so yeah, absolutely, it'll be on our duty to make sure that we get the value for that, and clearly if we can obtain grants from elsewhere, we will do so. But it is just that initial stages.
So just on the back of that, I presume when other organisations install a few charging points, it doesn't cost 100 grand to put in place the cabling and the electrical work. So presumably that is because we're looking at future-proofing for higher output because of fire engines needing more charging capacity or however it works. So given that's the case, but we're not necessarily sure on how whether fire engines in the future will be electric or hydrogen or whatever that might be, is there a cheaper option to put in place charging that will deal with our lighter vehicles that don't cost this large amount, that will achieve those savings quicker? And then we'll look at this later on as to whether we can upgrade capacity. I appreciate there's probably additional cost in that if we decide to go down that route, but are we over-egging the pudding early on with this?
Yep, fair question. So the predominant focus here is on the light vehicles, not the heavy. So although where there's an opportunity to put an empty duct in the ground at the same time that goes towards an appliance bay, for example, obviously it would make sense financially to do that and dig a site up once rather than twice. However, the aim here is not to put electrification into appliance bays. It is for vehicles in yards across the estate predominantly. So officer cars, pool cars, or vans, all those kind of things. There's a number of reasons why the value is the value and why it's not comparable to look at another organisation's equivalent cost. So we have 4 charging posts on this site already, for example, which didn't cost the figures, if you like, that are in here. However, the site is now at its capacity on it for its electrical capacity on that distribution board. So we'll need a new line put in to expand that any further. And that is predominantly the case across most of our sites. So as we know, the estate, the average age is now 56 years old for our buildings. They're not designed for electric vehicles or the power that is required to charge electric vehicles, even a car. So we have to put that infrastructure in, which is the cost. So it's the distribution, and it's that infrastructure rather than the bit you see, which is why the figure isn't comparable. If the Carbon Trust's assessment or whatever else of £500 for a post is true, if you've got the right power, the right availability, and you're just plugging a post in the end, then that is true. But actually, that's not where we are with our estate, the age of the estate, and the requirements that we have to do to provide it future-proof. In terms of the longevity of that, the intention will be to clearly have a space where there is capacity put into these buildings for future charging of more light vehicles or heavy goods vehicles, whatever it may be. So we're trying to preempt that and get ahead of it. Hopefully that answers your question. I might just come back to Councillor Hughes on the point around speed. This is not a quick solution. To get to 2035 is a long process, and even what we're proposing here, is quite rightly pointed out, will take time. So it will take 18 months to see electric charging points appear on the estate. So if we don't do them, it'll be every month that goes by is 19 months, 20 months before we can buy a car. So that's why we're trying to put those posts in now, get that infrastructure in now, and the same will be true with building works. So if we're looking at replacing boilers or insulating, that will take time to procure, mobilise, be on site. So the lead time will be, in excess of 12 months, everything we're trying to do with these kind of things. So it's getting ahead of that in the planning cycle so that teams can move forward.
As long as you're not repeating yourself, Gary, yes?
Never, Chairman, never. I think that my concern, and I think it was expressed by Councillor Price, my concern is actually with electric charging vehicles and the infrastructure that's being rolled out. It's almost like the beta videotapes, and actually what happened, they came out first, and all of a sudden this VHS came out and completely swamped the market and killed the beta. And my concern is that as advances in the technology accelerate and come forward, they're changing daily in terms of what you can and cannot do, and particularly with hydrogen fuel cells, etc., because they're much lighter in terms of the battery fuel cells, that if we could invest all this money and it's actually discovered that a new technology has come along and completely made it redundant and obsolete very quickly. So that's my caution. I'm not against it. I reckon, do the surveys over buildings, pay for the staff member, brilliant idea. I'm just cautious about this point. And I do recognise that the funding is sought for 22-23, not this year, which is quite important.
Yeah, as one who bought beta and 8-track stereo, I can recognise and sympathise with you. Roger.
Thank you. I think that David Fuller made a good point about the buildings. Now, I think that, well, I was under the impression that all our buildings had been surveyed, was it last year or the year before, because we built up a maintenance programme that was needed. So therefore, surely, we have majority of the data that we already need to actually sort of start getting on with the work. Because, you know, it's quite simple, isn't it? It's double glazing, it's insulation in the walls, insulation in the roof, heating system, and photovoltaic cells. Yeah, those are the issues. Now, that shouldn't need a lot of investigation, because I would have believed that we already have 90% of that information, because it's been reported here in the past that surveys have been done, and that's how we came up with a long-term capital programme of what we needed to do to bring our buildings up to standard. So I don't think an awful lot of work needs to be done on that. We should just get on with it. Regarding the vehicles, I mean, I'm still very concerned about putting in a large number, as Gary is that because I don't know whether it's going to be electric in the future or whether it's going to be hydrogen. And also I would imagine that the vehicles which we have at the moment, when vehicles get diesel and petrol, I'm not quite sure whether we have pumps on stations anywhere at all with large storage tanks of fuel. And if we have that, then the vehicle which is fueling at that point will have to put in some sort of number or whatever, so that one will know which vehicle the fuel is going to, so that somebody doesn't use it for their own personal use. Now, therefore, that then brings us round to the electric charging points. They're not going to have to be a standard charging point, because they're going to have to be some sort of electronics within it, I would assume, to know which vehicle the electricity is going to. Otherwise, anybody will be or could go up to it and put their vehicle on charge at it. And so that, I suspect, is going to make them much more expensive and also much more difficult to get hold of, because as I understand it at the moment, it is very difficult. There's about a 6 to 9 month wait list to get a charging point put in if you go and buy an electric vehicle. So that's going to make them probably even more complicated. So I think, to me, is listening to the debate, let's get on with the properties. We should know the majority of what the work is there to do. That represents 57% of our emissions. But go ahead with the vehicles, but go ahead very cautiously. And I think there is, as I said earlier on, there's a lot of meat to go on this report in the future to find out about that area. Because I do think that we could, if there is a change of the way that vehicles are going to be run, is wasting money. So I think just need to be careful.
Thank you, Roger. Just Derek and then Neil, and then I will try and sum this up.
Thank you, Chair. I thought it was an excellent paper put up but it's been very good debate, and I too share what I would call the middle ground. We have to go ahead with absolutely everything towards what is commonly called climate change, whatever the Carbon Trust says. I've sat in pension fund board meetings listening to Extinction Rebellion, listening to Dirty Money, all these deputations that we have to listen to, or probably do as good to listen to them, I don't know. But I'd just like to question two items. One, I fully support the recommendations, don't get me wrong, but I'd just like to ask two questions. What's the average sector distance your vehicles are using within a county of Hampshire?
I couldn't tell that off the top of my head. It varies significantly depending on the vehicle, whether it's a fire appliance, for example, in one of the cities will have a very low mileage compared to a rural, but we have the opportunities obviously to circulate vehicles around during their lifespan, and similarly with light vehicles it ranges significantly.
No, sorry, I was talking about per trip.
Right.
If they're going off to 6 or 7 miles down to Southampton or up to Basingstoke, whatever, wherever your vehicles are based, I would estimate it's pretty light, because the current problem with EV points is mainly motorway service stations where people are queuing, etc. Generally, our experience in Hampshire, and I do know it was discussed at Cabinet the other day, has been complete lack of use of all the installations that we've made, probably due to the fact that only 14% of cars being purchased are currently electric or hybrid. I just wonder whether you really need 110 electric charging points when most of your trips will be of a short sector distance. It was just a question of the cost, that was it. Okay.
Yep. So, although I can't tell you the exact distances per trip on an average, it will vary, as I say, depending on the vehicle. Remember, what we're not talking about necessarily, although it is included, but predominantly the vehicles are not pool vehicles that would be used for people driving around. They are, business vehicles for officers, predominantly. So 70 of our light vehicles are officer cars. So they respond to incidents, so will be, a hybrid or electric is the plan for those vehicles. So having enough points spread strategically across, 62 sites on the island and across Hampshire allows us to get those vehicles to be charged up more regularly. So I think it's slightly different in terms of probably a comparison with the county's fleet, largely pool vehicles and then sort of light goods vehicles through HTM or others. Slightly different use probably to ours.
Okay, and my just final point, if you can help me on an accounting matter, if you're leasing vehicles, is that off revenue budget or as opposed to purchase, which is off the capital budget?
So we currently don't lease vehicles, but if we were to change that, we'd have to paper and discussions with finance. But currently, all of our fleet is fully owned by the authority.
So that would reduce, possibly mixing it would reduce the capital budget item.
On purchasing new vehicles.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay, Liz, please, and then Neil.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm broadly in agreement with everything that's been said, believe it or not. I think Councillor Price is right. We should get on it and Councillor Hughes and do the buildings as quickly as possible. The electric charging, again, I'd go back to Councillor Harrison's thing and trial it in one of our sectors and just see the results. And the other thing, to have a member champion, if I may suggest, Chairman, we should have Councillor Hughes, because if he's convinced it's the right thing to do...
You've stolen my thunder. There is a person in here who has talked himself into the job.
Yes. On the grounds that, he will be the one person who would, if he's convinced, the rest of us will be convinced.
Chairman, if that's a proposal, I gladly accept. But I accept on the basis that I'm not against it, but it has to be done in a pragmatic, sensible, coherent and economic fashion. It cannot just be done as just gesture. I'm dead against gesture politics in any form. And if I can assist in moving this forward in a direction, and as Councillor Fairhurst has said, if I sign up as an advocate, not as a terrorist at the other end of the customer scale, I promise you.
Don't worry, you've got it. Just before Neil, Donna, you wish to say something?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if it might be useful for a couple of minutes if I just gave a quick update on where the constabulary are at as a fellow blue light service. So we have electric vehicles for some of the neighbourhood teams, a little sort of BMW, I think it's called an I something, I don't know the exact name of it, but they're very small little cars, very lightweight cars. And in terms of the installation of the electric charging points, well, at the new PIC in Basingstoke, I'll say newish now, PIC in Basingstoke and in Portsmouth, there are a whole load of charging points. And also we've built a couple of new forensic centres as well. One is called Elkhorn Place. They again have charging points because we can see that this is the way that we're going as a country. And actually, when the government, you look at the numbers the government committed, I think it was 18 months, 2 years ago, to the development of battery cell technology to fund, to support electric vehicle technology. I think it was something like £10 million. It was a lot of money in that research and development area. I am very, supportive of this initiative. Of course, it's got to be weighed up with pressures of other things in terms of capital budgets. At the moment, as a constabulary, we struggle to roll the electric vehicles out as wide as we'd like to because of the drain on the battery when you're driving at high speed, for example, with our response teams. And when you're looking at the Hampshire Roads Police team with the BMW X5s that they use, and they need that as a sort of, say, armoured vehicles are wrong word, it gives the wrong impression of us living in a high crime area. But those kind of vehicles, they are heavy, they need to drive at speed. The cars get really, really beaten up because they're used a lot. And so what we are doing at the moment is where we have the roads policing team using unleaded vehicles and diesel vehicles, they pass down to neighbourhoods when they need them for estate cars, when they get 2 or 3 years old. And police vans, for example, we do keep for 12 years and they are dirty because they are diesel. And again, as soon as we can, push forward that technology to have, a greener force as we possibly can, I will do. One, because it's good for the environment, but two, if you look at our fuel bill each year as a constabulary, it is enormous. So whilst electric and the way that electric is produced is not necessarily clean in itself, actually, slight irony here, it's cheaper than putting diesel and unleaded into police vehicles. So from both a financial and an environmental perspective, I support it. But unfortunately, the technology is not there for us to use it wholly, which would be the same for obviously your very, very heavy vehicles that you have as well.
Thank you, Donna.
Chairman, before we bring in Neil, can I just make a point? This is the first time we mentioned the police. That's why I wanted to. And Neil may want to add something to my comments. But if we're talking about a number of electrical points here, we should be sharing this cost with the police force. And that hasn't been discussed yet. Now, that would certainly have an effect on the £1 million that we're talking about. That'll keep Gary happy for a bit. And the important thing is, if the police are doing the same thing, we should be talking with them at committee level. Shared services, saving costs, that sort of thing. And I really recommend that's the way forward.
Okay, point taken. Good. Chief. Oh, Matt, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So collaboration with the constabulary and others is absolutely central to this, and we'll use frameworks through the county council as an example, as do the constabulary. So where there's joint procurement, absolutely. I think there's an element where these are going on to our sites where we own the infrastructure, and then there's a separate conversation if the police want to use them, which I'm sure can be had aside the room, which helps to recoup costs as we do anyway on a cost recovery basis. But where there are sites, we tend to put the costs in for simplicity and then charge it back if other partners use it, whoever they may be.
Thank you. Members, there's one particular point I want to come back on, just as a kind of minor point of order, I suppose as the Chief Officer. But firstly, to say what a fantastic debate it's been, and best I've seen in a very, very long time, and over a matter which is really important for the future. And the Fire Authority clearly is the body that has responsibility for setting direction and strategy. So this is really, really helpful for us as officers to hear your deliberations and your considerations, and that's really helpful. But to make the point again, we deliver your strategy, your direction, and the safety plan is clear on our responsibilities and the purpose of the Fire Authority Fire Service, together making life safer. And we all know the impacts of the deteriorating environment, leads to worsening conditions. So I think it's really important we consider, and you've thought about the financial or the economic case, as well as the leadership case of a Fire Authority in this situation. But one thing I wanted to point to, and it's something I wouldn't want to fester or to exist in the ether without being challenged. And I know it was a bit of a throwaway line from Councillor Fuller around the budget versus target type of concept. I would expect to say, as I'm sure, me and my officers take our responsibilities for our principles of public life very seriously, and I'm sure our Chief Financial Officer will back me up in this. We are very clear that our budgets set by yourselves, agreed by you, are very much that, and where you have seen this year the underspends that we try very hard to achieve so it can be reinvested in other priorities. We work hard at that as a board, we work hard at that as officers for the benefit of our communities. So forgive me, it's not a grumpy moment, it's just a point of perhaps correction to what was suggested was a norm in this place, which is not.
Thank you, Neil.
I was going to ask Chief Officer if he agreed with the concept of sharing this with the police.
Oh, yes. So, I mean, and Matt's, I think, pointed towards the habit we have of working with the OPCC and the constabulary around both cost sharing, burden sharing, and when we invest in things together, it makes a lot of sense. So, I'd love to hear the PCC talking about the future where they can of moving into this technology, and we'd very much want to do that together. And as Matt has said, where we have estates which the police share with us, it makes every sense for us to share that burden, if you like, of the infrastructure costs. Sometimes the police pay up front, sometimes we do, and that's that way it works as partners, and I think it's an excellent model that's worked for many years and hopefully many years to come.
Thank you, everybody. I have to say this has been the most spirited discussion I've ever been on since I've been on the authority. Gary.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not wishing to usurp your summing up, which I'm sure will be brilliant. It's just one question that's just sprung to mind, same what Matt said earlier on, if I may. You want 940,000. Are we ring-fencing it for you to spend between now and 2030? Because as the vehicles come along, or are we going to spend this money within the next 2 to 3, 4 years?
So the intention is to spend that next year, so in the 22-23 financial year. Correct. As much of it as we need to deliver what we've said, yeah.
Is that all right, Gary? Yes, say yes.
Sorry, Chair, but you said you have a rolling programme of replacing vehicles. So yes. What's the average length of a non-operational vehicle in terms of in service? Yeah, but we could build 104 charging points and not use them because you don't have the vehicles to charge, based on the rollout of churn of vehicles.
Yep, and I go again that 80% of the cost is infrastructure, which we need to do. To even get one post on a site, we'll need to dig up the yard. So therefore you put all the infrastructure in for any charging points at that time, rather than put it in for one charging point to go with our new vehicles, and then have to dig it up again to expand it to 2, 3 or 4 charging points. So the intention is to put the infrastructure in next year, but the rollout of vehicles will then follow from 2023 onward, predominantly focus on the light, as I say, the Carr's vehicle initially.
Stop. That's it. Right. As I said, this has been the most spirited discussion I've been on since I've been in the authority, which is good, for this is what we are here for. And as Jonathan said, in this matter, everybody's right. We're all sort of going in the right direction. We, in our pre-meeting last night, our Conservative group, we actually raised the issue of having a champion for this. I mean, you are about to be asked to agree to having a carbon czar on this, which I think is good and essential, but I think also having a member of the authority as a watchkeeper, I think is also essential. And as I've said, someone in here has just talked themselves into the job, which is Gary, and I think you'd do it jolly well if you'd like to accept it, Gary.
You are, sir?
Yeah, good. There we are.
Very much so. Thank you very much for the honour, and I look forward to working with the person when they come online. Thank you.
And this fits in nicely with our process of having champions within the authority, and this is exactly the point of having a champion. So we're not saying yes. We're saying, I mean, Christ, look, this juggernaut is rolling already. We can't say no. We've got to be on it. We've got to be ahead of the game. But clearly, we don't want to waste money on something which isn't going to work. But if we don't do anything, we'll never know if we did waste money. So I think we should go ahead. So we come to the recommendations, which are on page 56.
Pose an amendment, Chairman.
You may pose an amendment if you wish.
On item 65, it says that the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approve option 3 to set clear carbon reduction pathway to 2030. We fully agree with that, but as I said earlier on, I think we should have aspirations to go further than that. So I'd like to add to that is to have aspirations to achieve the principles of option 4. That's without the money. I know it talks about money in option 4, and that's why I've put the word principle in there, because I think that what we would like to see is that wherever there is the opportunity to go farther than option 3, and obviously reports would have to come back if it involved money and what have you, but it's the principle of that. We feel that this is the most important, or one of the most important issues as there is, and as you've just said, Mr. Chairman, we're on the juggernaut, we've got to keep on moving with it. But I think we should lay down the marker. We want to go as far as we can, as quickly as we can.
Well, I'm not averse to that. Any other members have any other?
It just needs to be defined, a refined amendment. I've got the principle of it.
Yeah. Okay, we can refine it. All right. Okay, so the recommendations are on page 56. 1, that Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approve option 3 to set a clear carbon reduction pathway to 2030, but with the amendment which Roger has suggested. Next one, that Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approve funding of £940,000 for the installation of electric vehicle charging points, subject to the reprofiling of the current capital programme. I think we'll have to take that one individually. Do you agree?
You do each one at a time.
Well, I don't want to do this one individually because this is a sticker.
So we haven't agreed 65 yet, but that I don't care. We'll come into that.
Yeah, no, I want to do this one on its own because this is what is in there. So I'll read it again. That Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approve funding of £940,000 for the installation of electric vehicle charging points, subject to the reprofiling of the current capital programme, and bearing in mind we do have an authority czar on it as well. Do you agree?
Agree.
Anybody not agree? Noted.
I don't agree with that statement. It's too. I just believe we need far more information to make that decision, but I'm in the minorities and I accept that.
Okay, all right, okay. Then the rest I'll take all together. That Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority delegates authority to the Chief Financial Officer to approve the reprofiling of the current capital programme. That Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approve £150,000 from the Transformation Reserve for a statewide surveys for the creation of carbon reduction programmes, which will later come to the authority for capital investment. And the last one, that Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority approve in principle the creation of a new established post for financial year 22-23 to lead the programme delivery subject to the annual budget setting process. Do you agree?
Before that, do we not need an extra one, and that is appointing Gary as the champion? Because otherwise it's, unless we actually either bring it into this or make it as a separate one, he doesn't have that appointment unless we actually make that decision.
Who's the expert down there? Paul.
Chairman, I think the sort of concept of member champions is pretty much an informal thing, so it's not really a sort of formal appointment of the authority. So I think we can probably deal with it by capturing in the minutes that that was proposed and accepted, that Councillor Hughes would be the member champion for this arena. And I think we probably will revisit member champions generally again at a later date.
Okay, thank you, Paul. All right. So
I'm not going to argue against what the legal people say. All I just want to make sure is it's there, because we're going to be holding him to making sure he's doing his champion work to get it right.
It is there, and don't frighten him off, please.
Doubts there, Councillor Price.
Yes. Well, hold on, girls. Yes, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to take on the role. Well, if you read recommendation number 69, approve in principle the creation of a new establishment post, subject to the annual budget setting process. If that post is not created and that person's not put in it, I don't see how I can be a champion working with that particular individual.
Matt, comment?
Yeah, true. Without that post, it would be difficult to deliver the programme, which is why it's caveated to be part of the budget setting process. So it needs to be picked up in the revenue budgets and built in ongoing. So if you approve us looking at then how we fund that on an ongoing basis, then that's the intention today. And then through budget setting, it'll get budgeted for.
All right, so if we get that one, we get you. Okay?
Absolutely, on appointment of that individual.
Yeah. Do we agree, members, on those recommendations?
Agreed.
Anybody disagree? Phew. Thank you. Item 10. Oh, sorry, do you want to close? Matt, do you want any closing remark?
Terrified to say anything. Thank you all for your support in it, and I look forward to working with our new czar.
Likewise.
Thank you. Item 10, Property Matters Report. Matt, it's you again.
Yes, so members, this, for those who haven't seen this report, is a standard report that comes periodically to the Fire Authority, reporting on estate transactions which have happened within the delegated authority of the Constitution. So as you see in paragraph 2, there's an excerpt there from the Constitution. So any transaction that falls outside of the value or 10-year period within that comes here beforehand for your consideration. But anything that falls within the delegated authority is actioned by officers on your behalf and then retrospectively reported to the Fire Authority. They come predominantly twice a year. We group them up and bring them together. So this paper here doesn't seek any approvals per se. It's reporting in paragraph 5 the 5, I think, leases or licenses that have either been extended or granted or renewed with different bodies for your awareness. Clearly happy to take any questions. All of this is part of our safety plan and our estate strategy, which is around maximising the use of our built environment, and clearly working in collaboration with different agencies, including the PCC's office, the constabulary, ambulance, and other organisations. So happy to take any questions members may have.
Jonathan.
Very much. Since I'm very happy with the recommendation, I'm sure everybody else will be, it does mention section 5. So if we go to section 5, can we just get what I consider the right grammar? It says the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner have taken. I think it should be has. And that should be repeated in B as well.
Yeah.
So if we're going to highlight this, let's get the grammar right.
Office is a single entity.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On 5A, I fully agree with the recommendations here, and I think these are sensible decisions which the officers have made. But in A, about the extra space for the OPCC in this building, does the lease tie up with the current lease that they have for the other part of the building, or is this a different time period?
So it acts as a supplementary lease to the overarching agreement for the joint headquarters.
Anything else, members, on this? Donna.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it would be rude of me not to say officially, and I know you're aware of the situation, a huge thank you to your director, Matt Robinson, and also to Aaron Hedges, your estates manager, who have, well, particularly Aaron, has acted in an amazing way over the last 3 weeks to support me and the estates team at the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner with a couple of urgent issues that arose. And I think it's an excellent example of collaborative working between Blue Light Services. When an issue came to light, the Chief Constable and I spoke, and the first person that we decided we wanted to talk to was your Chief Fire Officer. And he responded amazingly, connected us with Aaron, and Aaron has done an amazing job supported by Matt and the team. And I just want to place on record formally a thank you on behalf of me and my team for that fantastic piece of joint working.
It's a pleasure. Neil, do you want to say anything? No? Okay. Pleasure. David.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick one. On paragraph 5, section E, you've got the telecoms mast, and it's got the reason the rent is sat at that level. None of the others explain why that level of rent was set. I just wondered whether there was a bit of detail. Is that a commercial decision?
For E specifically is set by the code, the telecommunications code. So the only reason we mention it is because historically those have been at a much higher level for the authority, but since the code has come in, it mandates that you can only recover basically that figure. All the others are taken on a case-by-case basis. So when we work with other blue lights or public bodies, we have a cost recovery mechanism that allows us to have a consistent sort of basis to charge, or if there are commercial sort of entities, and again it's taken in a slightly different context, but it's all around recovering our costs rather than anything else. But that one is set differently because it's dictated to by the code, if you like.
Thank you. I just wondered why that was in there and not for something else. But if there clearly is a process that is followed for all of these, that's fine.
Matt, anything closing remark?
No, nothing from me. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So we move to the recommendation on page 114, which is that Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority note all items outlined within para 5. Agree? Anybody disagree? No. Does anybody have any other business?
Just one quick thing. This has clashed with a pension fund panel. There's, I think, 3 of us would have been at it. Maybe we can check to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, we can take that away. I think there's an element of inevitable clashes, but we'll make sure we minimise them through the democratic services wherever possible.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is 12:13 and the meeting is closed.